Hey folks, welcome back to the Wisdom Tradition Podcast. This is Alex Sacken, and today I'm going to be featuring an interview I did a few weeks ago with Walter Bosley, who is a researcher specializing in the 1800s, early 20th century era of the UFO mystery. And this is probably the most overlooked element by UFO researchers. And for me, it's the key to unraveling the mystery. And I've written extensively about this. I have a whole book that I've published first in my Substack, and there will soon be a print edition of that book, but it's called The Secret History of the 20th Century, and it tells this story of the rise of a human-run, nothing to do with aliens, but a human-run research into hidden science, hidden technology, and this has to do with the true origin story of UFOs. So Walter Bosley wrote a book called Origin, and it's about this whole 1800s aspect of the UFO story. So I'm going to be interviewing him today about that, and I'll have more information soon on the print edition of that series on the history of the 20th century. And it's probably going to be a couple months off, but it's going to be worth it and going to be great when it comes out. And before I jump into the interview, I just want to note that the Kindle edition is now available, and soon the print edition will be available of my book on Manly P. Hall. And I originally put out the sort of initial draft of this also on my Substack and podcast over the past year, but I completely re-edited the whole thing, and this will be available just after Thanksgiving. So keep an eye out for the print edition of this book on Manly Hall, and then the Kindle editions are actually already available now. So without further ado, let's jump into my chat with Walter Bosley, and I hope you enjoy. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Good. Yes, I can. Great.
Oh, good. Okay.
Hey, thanks for joining me. It's really nice to meet you.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I was thinking, okay, have I ever done? I don't think I've ever done your show.
No, I haven't done too many interviews with people. I have done one with Nick Cook. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a big name in the UFO field.
Oh, yeah.
I want to do more in the future, but I really wanted to have you because your book Origin, which is about the 1800s era aspect to the UFO mystery, which is completely overlooked by almost everybody, and I think is one of the keys to unraveling this mystery. So I'm really excited to talk with you about it.
Cool.
And I want to know, like, for me in this field, in this area of the UFO mystery, the 1800s, your book and some of the work by Richard Dolan is what I draw from. But let me ask you, because it is kind of an obscure field, what alongside yourself, who are some of the other prominent researchers, and who are the other kind of people who have been focusing on this element of the mystery?
Okay. Well, just so you know, I tend to disagree with a lot of the mainstream big UFO names because most of them just want to stop with ET. Right. And I totally believe ET exists. I totally think ETs have come to this planet in the past. I think they still continue to do so. And I think they explain a small percentage of UFOs. But I think the overwhelming majority, I usually put it at 90%, is actually human technology developed through the centuries. And so that's my contribution, is to try to point out the things that do have a pedigree in human history. Right. And that's, as you know, that's been a very rich field for me because of the threads I've been pulling. And when we get into it, have we started already? Or
yeah, we're recording.
Okay. I very recently, a couple of weeks ago, myself and two other colleagues, we made what we thought was a major breakthrough with the Sonora Aero Club mystery. In other words, what they use to generate their anti-gravity, so to speak.
Right.
And I'll just jump right into it. You've read Origin, and in a couple of my other books, I talk about the Sonora Aero Club, of course, right? And they date back to the 1850s. It's my opinion that the technology of the 1890s airship mystery, the one that most people know about, I think that is a descendant technology, a descendant product of what the Sonora Aero Club was doing in the 1850s. In fact, I have this chart called the Bosley chart because I came up with it. And what I do is I take one of the 1850s flying machines called an Aero, A-E-R-O. I take one of those, and then I take I add a photo or an illustration of one of the 1890s airships, which were bigger and they were more complex, more advanced. And then I display next to that a photo of the classic silver mid-century 1950s era flying saucer. Now, below that, I put corresponding images corresponding to the 1850s flying machine called an Aero, which is really proof of concept. I show that that's like the Model T automobile from the early 20th century. Then you get to the 1890s. Well, what the 1890s airship is to the 1850s flying machine is the same thing as a 58 Buick is to a Model T. Okay, so the 58 Buick is what you can equate with the 1890s airship. Then when we get to the mid 20th century flying saucer, I show that that is to the airships and the old Aeros as a 1985 Porsche is to a 58 Buick and a Model T. So you get the idea. It shows kind of, because people like a kind of a quick assessment, and they can look at that.
You know what that chart does? I know what chart you're talking about, and that really illustrates the fact that we're dealing with a technology tree. We're dealing with the development of a science and a technology that's not alien.
That's right.
But it is alien in a sort of symbolic sense compared to the science and technology we have today, the sort of public science we have today.
Exactly. And it's greatly because this is based on knowledge that was kind of kept close to vest by people. Now, here's the big breakthroughs that I've been involved in making since I wrote Origin, and that is Charles Delshow, the man who we learned about the Sonora Aero Club and this mysterious group nimza from. He's our original source. In his pages and pages and hundreds, I think maybe thousands of illustrations, he has a diagram of the turbine process, the actual turbine that was used by the Sonora Aero Club members to make their machines fly, to make their little arrows fly. And what I discovered when I dug a little deeper into the human history of this stuff, what I learned was that the turbine process that Charles Delshow illustrates. Now, remember, real quick, Delshow did these illustrations between 1890 and 1923. He died in 1923. Okay, so he's saying that this is the turbine process. It is virtually identical to what's called the Racine turbine, which was designed and published in 1849 by Macquorn Racine, who was one of the fathers of the modern study of thermodynamics. And when I say virtually identical, what I mean is that Delshow in his illustrations, he just has a couple of parts of the turbine in different spots, but they are identical. They are exactly what Macquorn Racine, a very human being here on Earth, designed and published just a few years before the Sonora Aero Club was reportedly using that system to make their flying machines work. Now, that's not the only part of it. The other part of it, I made that discovery, kind of stumbled onto it 2 years ago, I think, 2 summers ago, the Racine turbine being...
By going through the journals, or what stimulated
you? I just started searching through, engineering history in the 19th century. To be honest, it didn't take me long for the Racine turbine to pop up. And, I looked at it and I immediately recognized it because it's essentially what Delshow illustrated. Now, here's what's interesting. Made that discovery 2 years ago, but what remained a mystery was the was the I don't want to call it fuel, but the liquid that was part of whatever it is they were doing. The leader of the Sonora Aero Club, this man named Peter Menace, he referred to, and Delschow referred to this liquid as the soup.
Mm-hmm.
And it was green. So 2 years ago, when I kind of stumbled onto the Racine turbine being identical to what Delschow said they used in the 1850s in Sonora, I thought, well, you know what? What if I had kind of an inspired moment? What if it was liquefied emerald? So I pitched that to my colleague and good friend Joseph Farrell,
Mm-hmm.
and we ruminated on that, and we liked the idea of a liquefied mineral of some sort, gemstone or whatever, but we just weren't sure that it would be emerald. And then we thought, these guys are in California, how would they get their hands on enough emerald, and on and so forth. So I was on the right track with a liquefied mineral, what have you, but emerald wasn't it. Well, just 2 weeks ago, when I went up to Sonora, Tuolumne County, for the nimza Con, the conference that we had,
Mm-hmm.
the route that I took into Sonora was a different one than I had taken before, and it brought us through Mariposa, California. And in the cliffs and the mountainsides and the hillsides, the ones that are cut out for the road and around town, there is a ridiculous abundance of a greenstone known as mariposite, named after that city in California because it was found in abundance there. Now, some sources will tell you that it's the only place in the world where you can get mariposite. Others say that because there's mica involved, that mariposite in little bits can be found elsewhere. But basically, in the 1850s, the only place you could get this was in southern Tuolumne County, right where the Sonora Aero Club was. So my associates Malia Grimm and Olaf Phillips and I, we all kind of made this, this discovery a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed it, and we all agreed that the key to the mysterious soup, liquid fuel, or what have you, of the Sonora Aero Club in the 1850s was liquefied mariposite. Basically, you pulverize it, you powderize it, and Delschow himself said that the leader of the club said all he had to do to the mystery ingredient was add water. And now we have thrown this at, I don't know if you're familiar with Jeremy Reese and his Falcon Laboratory. Alien scientist is what is the name he goes by. He has a bona fide lab, and they're going to do some lab tests of liquefied mariposite in the turbine design that Charles Delschow says the Sonora Aero Club used. And because of the chromium and the other elements of the mariposite, they're pretty excited. When I laid this on them about our discovery, they were pretty excited because as soon as they started looking, they said, yeah, that makes sense. That would work, not just for the chromium, but for the monatomic gold that's in it, which has been said to make make objects that it flows through lighter in weight. So think about that.
Well, let me ask you, if I recall right, in your book, did you discuss this idea that maybe Charles Delschow wrote about, this guy Peter Menace, the founder, that he had made he was originally a mining engineer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And he had made some kind of discovery while he was like a hobbyist or experimenting with alchemy. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the key would be in the basic principles of alchemy, because alchemy is based on this idea of the ether, the luminiferous ether, right. And that was very much a critical aspect of physics in the 1800s.
Yeah, exactly. And having been a mining engineer and having the reputation, of being involved with alchemy, it makes even more sense that Peter Menace was likely using mariposite as the secret ingredient in his soup. Mm-hmm. That he could, again, I'm not sure if I want to call it a fuel, but whatever it was that the soup was actually doing, we are convinced, us three, Malia Grimm, Olaf Phillips, and I, that it's mariposite, that's the secret ingredient. And alien scientist Jeremy Reese is in agreement, and it's worth testing. So
Yeah.
we're real excited about that, because if they get what will be determined a positive result, that's big. That's a breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see.
So let's go back and keep looking at to put a timeline to it. The sort of beginning of the story, as far as we can track it, is with these journals of Charles Delshow, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah, that's our first knowledge, our
yeah.
first source on this.
And so what he references is not only the existence of a society, or engineering society in California, led by this guy named Peter Minnis, he had started built a group around him.
Mm-hmm.
But he also mentions that there were other societies. It seemed like maybe they weren't integrated together, but there were
Right.
other programs at the time, right?
Yeah, and we just, from Delshow, and really from any other source, we don't know
Right.
really anything about these.
So here's my thinking.
Yeah.
So we have this environment right now that we're working with in the 1800s, mid 1800s, the earliest that we can track, where we have a different paradigm of physics being worked with.
Yes.
By small groups in the American West, and they are experimenting with taking these ideas which were normally worked with in a different context. Now we have the dawn of the scientific age, the dawn of the industrial age, and now we have these ideas from alchemy, the sort of ancient science, now being brought into a new context. And what's resulting from this experimentation is a new type of perhaps energy device, but definitely we have evidence that anti-gravity flying vehicles are able to be generated using these technologies.
Right.
I mean, this scientific paradigm, and it seems to be based on this principle of alchemy. So this is all kind of revealed in this very early, right from the onset of the UFO mystery. We're looking at this paradigm of science with alchemy, and we're looking at groups experimenting with it at this stage, maybe not united. And and then there's also this factor that I want to learn more about, which is nimza, which is, as if I recall correctly, it was a group that wasn't originally attached to the Sonora Aero Club, but at a certain point got brought in potentially as a financier, and then tried to militarize what the group was doing. Is it kind of
Delshow isn't exactly clear. His vague description of nimza strongly indicates the secretive nature, right, of this organization. And we don't know from Delshow. We don't know what their origin is. They're described as kind of what the Sonora Aero Club is doing is either of deep interest and possible sponsorship, or maybe started out directly under the aegis of this mysterious nimza. We don't know for sure. All we do know for sure from Delshow, the source, is that it was a German-based and headquartered organization, specifically back then, of course, Prussian. And it would have likely have been Prussian nationalist at that time, because there were almost 50 Prussian states, and Germany was not unified then. Right. But the big unification push had started by the 1850s. Right. And so, unfortunately, we don't know anything about the other organizations that nimza may have been overseeing or been interested in. Right. We really the 1890s airship mystery still is a Western United States phenomenon, right? So the rumored East Coast airship builders, well, we only have a couple of airship sightings on the East Coast, and we can't be sure that those weren't the West Coast airship builders making it across the continent, because in the literature of the airship mystery, there is that discussed how they can go from coast to coast or wherever in hours, right? So we really have little to no evidence currently that I'm aware of yet. If somebody's got it, please bring it out, that there was an East Coast airship builder. So why is that important? Well, when you look at the descriptions of the airships in the 1890s, as I argue in my book Origin, particularly with my Bosley chart that I created, I point out that the technology being described is really just an advanced version of what Delchau wrote about and depicted in his art, saying that the Sonora Aero Club of the 1850s was doing. For instance, I discovered that there was a device virtually identical to the legendary Nazi Bell of the 20th century, but it was in a very rudimentary proof of concept form. Okay, it was a primitive version of that, but it brought torsion and spin and rotation into the game. Now, in the 1890s airship mystery, we have a description of rotating, spinning devices that had everything to do with the lift and the, propulsion and so forth. So that says to me that you're looking at some of the same people that had developed what was going on in California in the 1850s being involved with the airship mystery of the 1890s. And we have our main suspects in the Wilsons. There was a member of the Sonora Aero Club in the 50s named Wilson, 1850s named Wilson. And then in the 1890s, there was an uncle and nephew, an older Wilson and a younger Wilson, who were identified in multiple sightings as being the pilots and the crewmen of these airships. So,
and one of them, if I remember, his name's Hiram, right?
Well, there's Hiram,
Hiram, which is a Masonic. That could be a Masonic reference.
Could be Hiram and Willard, because there's a lot of, there's Masonry popping up throughout the airship mystery, right? As we know. So, of course, and it wouldn't be shocking to find out that these alchemists, were all Masons, and that was how they could be sure of each other and trust the guy they were sharing stuff with.
Well, I mean, for the kind of technological progression you're describing between the 1850s and 1890s, there would need to be some organizational body that was forming that would preserve the knowledge, develop it, almost like a university or not a university, but like a think tank or something like that.
Well,
there would be a need for something like that.
I argue that the 1890s airship mystery is the ultimate product of America's first black project. In my book, Secret Missions 3, Destination Carcosa, which gets into Ambrose Bierce and his possible connection to all this, I point out that after the 1850s Sonora Aero Club mystery, and we're told Peter Menace is killed in an explosion and a crash, but we don't know where he's buried. We don't know anything about the disposition of his remains. So did he really die? Sometime between then and 1863, we're talking 1857, I think, to 1863, not that many years, we have a guy named Solomon Andrews showing up in Washington, D.C., after writing Abraham Lincoln and telling him he's got a flying machine. Abraham Lincoln tells his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, have your people, your War Department people, go meet with this guy and let him demonstrate this for you. So there's a newspaper report that Solomon Andrews demonstrated publicly before members of Lincoln's War Department and members of the press in Washington, D.C., his flying machine, and it worked. It was a controllable flying machine. It wasn't like a balloon. It wasn't just like a Zeppelin with the propellers on it. He was able to control it in more ways than just those craft. So we're told that Edwin Stanton said, no thanks, but no thanks. We're in the middle of a war. We don't have time to fiddle with this. And then that was the end of it. I disagree. I think it's possible, therefore it has to be considered, that yes, they were in the middle of the war, but once the war was done, I think they had actually made a deal with Solomon Andrews to develop this secretly. Why would they do it secretly? Well, America was going through Reconstruction, and there was a lot of economic problems.
And you might have had this Mason network involved with it, in which case
might have a Mason network. So it became a secret project, and the key to that is a guy named Colonel Samuel Tillman. He wasn't a colonel back then when he started, but Tillman by name is identified in the 1890s airship mystery as being one of the crewmen. Now, if you look at Colonel Samuel Tillman's career, he was a chemist and a cartographer.
Mm.
Okay. There's two criteria right there that could link him to the airship mystery, but he's mentioned by name. Now, back then, it's not like he was a famous guy in the 1890s. It's not like he was a rock star of his day where, oh, look, it's Samuel Tillman. Right. Why would a witness, if they're going to fake this, choose a guy like Samuel Tillman? No, I argue that because I think the airship mystery is real, not a joke. I think Tillman was on one of those airships, and he, in my mind, in my hypothesis, it's a speculation right now. I think he's our key that the U.S. government, backed by the War Department and contractors, were developing these airships. And the 1890s was when they reached a certain level and decided to go out and show them off to see, maybe what kind of reaction they would get, in my opinion.
Mm. Yeah, well, one thing that the thing about the 1890s, it kind of comes rapidly, it kind of rises rapidly, becomes very frequent, and then it just dies off, right? So it was like a 2-year hotspot period when the sightings were relatively commonplace along the American West, right?
Yeah, and by the way, the naysayers and the critics and the people that I think they're not interested in the subject. They say, oh, it was all an April Fool's joke. Well, what's kind of funny is the airship mystery sightings started in November, of the year that they started, November. And they were seen for several months, not just in April. So the idea that the airship mystery was a big April Fool's hoax is just another one of those things.
There's newspaper articles all around the country talking about these things.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying is, a lot of the criticism is, oh, this was all just a joke, April Fools. And I'm thinking, wow, if you still believe that, you're not looking close enough.
Right. Because now we have this multi-decade development. It's not like this just comes out of nowhere. Now, particularly with these Del Shout journals, that kind of breaks the story open that, hey, we're looking at like a secret network of societies involved with technology, involved with alchemy, and then there's reference to financiers, like maybe oligarchs kind of secretly involved. So now we're looking at the maybe the origins of what we call the deep state today.
Deep state is a different animal that I think emerged in the 20th century. I think what you're looking at with the secret technology thing is something that certainly the later thing we call the deep state that emerged certainly latched onto. One of the reasons why it probably disappeared going into the 20th century is because of the emergence of deep state type thinking. Yes, but at the time, I really, in the 1890s, that two-year window you talk about, I think that that anything like the deep state didn't have their claws in it yet.
Right. No, so. I agree. But I think what I'm trying to get at is, all right, let's go back to the airship mysteries, the late 1890s. They rise suddenly, there's a lot of them, but then they die off almost overnight.
Yes. Yeah,
and that to me tells me consolidation. There's been a consolidation of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that tells me that there's now a group organized with a vested interest of keeping this science and technology secret.
Absolutely. But then there's the other interesting question. My problem is I don't see every guy that would have been involved with the 1890s airship mystery as wanting to go along with that. So the question is, what happened to those guys? Where did they go?
Right.
Were they paid off? Were they perhaps eliminated? It's an interesting question because I have people ask me all the time, well, Walter, if this stuff was real, how come we didn't see it used in World War I? And that's a good question. How come we didn't see this, used in World War I? Because we didn't. That, I think, goes back to, we can talk about the deep state in that one, definitely, because, in my mind, the 20th century was a complete, pretty much takeover, right, by deep state type players. Right. Absolutely. And they would have been involved in suppressing, any independent development of this technology. Right. I think.
Another thing that fits into this time period when we're talking about the the disappearance of these airships and perhaps what was
Hmm.
happening. Because right around this time, you also see the rise of a sort of imperialist philosophy in American leadership. And it's not that long after where you had the Federal Reserve. So there's not only the disappearance of the airships, implying consolidation, but now all these other things are starting to emerge at the same time,
Yep.
to co-emerge. And
Yep.
one of the interesting things is that Nikola Tesla comes now into this picture right around the late 1890s,
Yep.
early 1900s, and he's like a savant, right? So
Yeah.
he's not connected to this whole airship mystery. He's not necessarily privy to the secrets of science that they've been developing in their experimentations. So
Right.
he has a more intuitive kind of realization of maybe the similar scientific principles and begins charting his own designs, and he develops a relationship with JP Morgan. So it's unclear how tied in the American oligarchs were to these secret networks at this point in the 1890s. Maybe they didn't know, maybe JP Morgan did know or didn't know about the airship mysteries, and the environment around that, whoever is responsible. But one thing we can track is that JP Morgan and presumably the elite oligarchical networks became aware of it through Tesla, because it's known that he was in a relationship with Tesla, and he basically put the kibosh on Tesla's work when he kind of figured out the scope of it. So I'm thinking right around the turn of the century, there's definitely now at least two groups that know about this science. We have JP Morgan and oligarchs, but then we have this earlier network, and maybe they overlap and maybe they don't overlap. What do you think?
I'm still trying to, your guess is good of mine on that, as good as mine on that particular stretch of history there, because I admit I'm still trying to figure out where they go. I mean, the wildest answer to that question we have is the whole 1903 mystery, where Tesla allegedly was asked by a group, unidentified group, to engineer an airship for them that allegedly they wanted to take to Mars in 1903. Now, we in our 21st century, world, we know that the first problem with that we think of is, oh, life support. How are you going to keep them alive? Number one.
Right.
Oh, okay. Propulsion. With this, with our perception of what they, 1890s or 1900s alleged airship technology was. I mean, this seems ridiculous.
Right.
Even though there are some wildly speculative but wonderful little tidbits of reason to allow that possibility to be in the conversation. But yeah, it seems to me that whoever was involved with the 1890s airship mystery, by the time we got into the early, the first decade of the new century, yeah, there were people like Morgan and others that, to one degree or another, I think would have been involved in suppression,
Mm-hmm.
um, even if they were on the peripheral. Now, what's interesting is you have a guy like John Jacob Astor, who a lot of people don't know. He wrote a couple of science fiction novels, one involving an airship, and he was a really interesting guy. Well, what happens? He's one of those rich guys who were opposed to certain things that the people for the Federal Reserve were all for, and golly, they all die on the Titanic. So
Ah,
that's an interesting conversation there. Did the silencers, see to it that the men of power were eliminated or scared
ah,
off or bought out? I don't
interesting.
know, but I admit that in my hypothesis, the first, I want to say at least 25, 30 years of the 20th century, that's a dark period. Where did these guys go?
Right.
And the only reemergence we see of it, honestly, is in this idea that if the Nazi scientists were playing with the bell, okay, um, we know, as I discovered some years back, we know that Delschau said that this German group, the Sonora Aero Club, made up of German immigrants in California in the 1850s, they were using a rudimentary proof of concept version of the bell. And then here, 70 years later or whatever, as we get into the World War II era, we now suspect that the Nazis were doing that same rudimentary device, but wow, really pumped up with 20th century industrial technology and electricity.
Right.
So there, I've tied that thread to the 19th century. So there's got to be other threads, right? There just has to be other threads. And again, the dark spot is the first 25 years of the 20th century. Where were they? Where did they go?
Right.
Did they emerge in the 1950s with the likes of T. Townsend Brown?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, this is another key element that I think crack this UFO mystery, at least when it comes to aliens, because the airships disappear 1897. Tesla's work disappears a few years later. Then you don't, like you were saying, there's a dark period. You don't see or hear anything about this.
Right.
And in the meantime, you have the ether theory be written out of the science books, replaced by Einstein relativity theory and quantum mechanics. So it's like clearly there is an orchestration of events to consolidate and keep this paradigm secret. And then finally, around World War II, when you do start to hear once again this idea about flying saucers and stuff. I mean, at first there are rumors about German stuff, but really when it becomes mainstream again and you start to see it in papers, it's under the guise of alien. There's been an alien crash.
They would rather have you believe that a flying saucer from another world crashed, and the German scientists reverse engineered that, and it led to the Bell, and it led to the Haunebu and these other things. Which, by the way, I hate to burst anyone's bubble. This is where I usually get boo hiss from people. The Haunebu and those Nazi flying saucers, they're fantasy, they're fiction. They did not exist. They are part of post-war propaganda and lies. Oh boy, I'm forgetting the guy's name. Ernst Zundel. It started with a guy named Ernst Zundel, and then it's just got a pedigree of fraud. But people want to believe that, even though I and some others see that there is definitely a technology thread going back, in human history, and directly linking the Bell to the 1850s in California with this group. I know maybe it's not as exciting as the idea of a crashed ET saucer, but I find it just as amazing and impressive that, somebody among us has been developing this stuff right along the way and has brought it to the level that I think we're seeing in classified technology.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really take away from all of this discussion is that really when you pull on the UFO mystery, you don't end up coming to aliens as the ultimate fascination. You come to the mysteries of human history and the mysteries of even the nature of reality and energy and physics, being potentially the exact opposite of what we think.
Yeah. And to me, for me personally, that's way more fascinating than ET. My thing is, I accept ET. To me, I think it's just rational to assume that there are countless inhabited worlds out there with advanced civilizations, and okay, that's cool. And when they decide to openly come here and say, hey, we're here, that's going to be a cool, big, great day. But compared to what you just described, to me, it's so what? I'm much more interested in what you were just describing, these mysteries and wonders of interdimensional physics and all the possibilities that could open up. And to me, that's much more. We're getting into the transtemporal here on the cosmic level, across time and across physical space and interdimensionality. I find that, and the aliens, the extraterrestrials, I'm sure several of them use that kind of knowledge to traverse space. That's another reason why it's exciting, because it's in our blood. We're not homebodies. We're not stay at home and tend the garden type beings. We are what's on the other side of that horizon, what's beyond that star. That's our nature. And that's how many human beings that are here, I think their ancestors got here in the first place. And many of our descendants are going to be of that ilk. And as soon as we understand this technology and we can traverse the stars, it is our destiny to do this. Destiny with a small d. It's our nature. Let me put it that way. I think it's in our nature. And so this is why, to me, this is exciting, is because ultimately it's going to open up, traveling the stars, traveling, multiverses.
And it also opens the possibility to use these technologies to actually heal the earth, you know what I mean? And create a
why
different
not?
social
Right?
order, you know?
See, that's the thing, is some people would say, oh, Walter, you just want to use the planet and leave it behind. No, we could use these technologies to maybe not, what am I trying to say? Maybe not abuse other celestial bodies while we, get, resources from them.
So I want to revisit this idea of the deep state for a minute and see if we can put a bit of a structure to it.
Okay.
So the American empire, the US empire, has two different aspects to it. It has the aspect that's more interfaces with the oligarchy and is like spreading around the world, like financial empire, corporations. And so that's the horizontal. It's spreading around the world and creating a sort of civilization based in America. So American driven. And then inside of that and nested within that is the secret area that we're talking about, a whole different paradigm of technology. It's underground. And so really, like, the American empire is polarized in two, and this whole story that you talk about in your book Origins, for me, kind of reveals this trajectory, because we have one paradigm of physics being used by this very deep group, and then we have this oil economy and the science that goes with that as being the outer part of empire. And so that's kind of the model I have in mind for what has developed over the course of this period of time that we're talking about, 1800s going into the 1900s. Does that kind of make sense to you, that basic structure?
Yeah, in fact, I've developed it a little further. I have a new book out, Nimza: How America Sold Its Soul. You can get it at walterbosley.com. The link is there. And basically, I lay out how we became subject to the fascist side of the deep state. In my opinion, you got the deep state coin. The oligarchs, of course, are up there running it, right? Globalists. They're using the Marxist side and the fascist side. They used it to build and propel the American empire since the end of World War II, okay, and to control us as well. But I see it as Marxist and fascist elements, okay, and they can work very well together. You use you use the corporate, example, and that's where fascism excelled. They say, professional marketers say that the Nazi swastika was the greatest use of a logo in history. That's disturbing, but according to them, it was the first in the modern era, really modern use of a logo. And what's disturbing is corporations have, since World War II, attempted to capture that same type of power and brand recognition with logos. There's a whole study on this kind of stuff. You could spend a lot of time in it, but that's what I see the deep state doing. They're using Marxism and fascism in pushing this empire that we have, maintaining it, enforcing it, and also controlling the American public through not just social opiates, but through diversions, like keeping us at each other's throat, politically, like we have been for 20 years, really. So that's what I see the deep state doing to us. Now, in my new book that I mentioned, I look at it from the fascist side, okay, that came through Operation Paperclip. I go in and I tell you the history dating back to the medieval era that, in my mind, proves that Operation Paperclip was a Trojan horse. Most people don't know that it was a German idea. The German scientists came up with the idea for Operation Paperclip, not us. They went to Colonel Harry Armstrong and said, hey, here's something you could do. I see it as a total Trojan horse. It's something that the Prussian Junkers culture did, dating back to the Teutonic Knights. It was ingratiate yourself, build up your host, then through duplicity, betray them, and latch yourself on to the next host who can give you more power and more resources. And that's exactly when Germany was losing World War II. That's exactly, in my opinion, what the Nazi leadership did. They found a way, wait a minute, who's the big, powerful guy in the world now? Oh, this upstart United States. Look what they did, from 1939, and now they're kicking our butts. Okay, we can use them. And so Operation Paperclip was their idea. It was their Trojan horse to get their hooks in us. Our military, our post-World War II military industrial complex, that version of it, a vision and product of Nazi philosophy, and pretty much a product. The United States has done more fascist things since the end of World War II, and you got to wonder why.
Right. My take, I have a bit of a different take. My take is that this whole structure that we've been describing that's been built up, this sort of underground aspect of U.S. empire that has to do with that dates back to the airship mysteries, and that my feeling was around the turn of the century when this was getting consolidated, there was a sort of a plan to keep this initial aspect very hidden, but then to gradually have America adopt a sort of a second kind of peripheral version of this. And they did that by means of Nazi Germany and their secret Commerstadt program. So
what you're saying does not I don't see any conflict with what I was describing and what you're saying. Of course, there's been somebody above also using this Nazi thing, but they were at the same time using the Marxist thing through the Soviet Union.
Right. Yeah, they were doing both. Yeah.
Yeah, they've been using both against us since the end of World War II.
So this whole situation now, let's maybe take this, and with our last couple minutes, maybe look at current events that are going on today and see what they preface. So we're recording this on August 26th, 2023, and this is right in the middle of this crisis in the Middle East with Israel and perhaps a breakout of a larger war in the region. Mm-hmm. And about a year and a half ago is when we had the Ukraine crisis happen, when it seemed that a similar war was being sort of instigated behind the scenes to draw Russia, and Russia might be getting drawn into this current situation too. And so the effect of both of these wars is to destabilize in a big way the energy markets and the flow of the flow of oil. And really, my feeling is that after World War II, and what we're talking about, how this U.S. empire got built up, it was built up on the back of the petrodollar, right?
Sure.
And so if America is deliberately drawing this Ukraine war into existence and this current situation in Israel, does this suggest to you that America is getting ready to abandon the petrodollar system and perhaps reveal or move into some of this secret world of technology that's been developing but has never revealed? And does the UFO revelations that are happening now maybe tie into that?
From the dollar, the financial aspect, to answer your question, the yes would be pertinent to what may actually be being done off planet. I'm I call it a classified space program, because the term secret space program, quite frankly, has been so sullied and soiled by the likes of clowns like Corey Goode and these other fools who make up these stupid stories about fantasy space programs. So classified space programs, you can trace this. This has been going on. Manned space stuff has been going on since the late 50s, early 60s. By the military, the U.S. Air Force, in particular. And so we don't know the extent to, what we're already doing in space. But I absolutely think the plan for getting us out into space, for venturing off planet, that mining and resources and the technology development that will be required to reach these resources is every bit a part of that. And if we were to move from petrodollar, we would move to something that would be reflective and a product of this off-planet industry. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, I think it could very much be a sign, a signal that we will eventually make a move like that. But what'll have to happen is we'll have to see that become really viable in a very profitable way before I think that shift would happen.
Right.
And they're going to need manpower to make it profitable in this way I'm talking about. This is why they ultimately are going to have to open up space to the common guy and gal, because they're going to need, eventually, they're going to need, quite frankly, employees, you know, in space.
All right.
So once that becomes possible, and once industry can be a common thing, right, out in space, then I think that's when you will see what you're suspecting, the shift from the petrodollar to a dollar based upon what that advanced technology is going to move us into. And I think it's off-planet industry.
All right, Walter. Well, I know you got to go. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really appreciate it, and really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, hey, thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
All righty. Thank you.
All right, take care. Cheers.
All right.